Hi everyone, my name is Cynthia. Let's talk books. Today I'm here to talk about all of the books that I read in the month of October. October is my birthday month, and so I like to indulge in all the books during the month of October. I did take a break from booktube in the month of October, and that actually helped me focus more on reading rather than like making videos, editing videos, all of that. I enjoy booktube a ton, which is why I am back. But I have to admit that not having to do the editing and the captioning did free up a bit of time. I also cut my hair, elephant in the room. I don't think I even mentioned it in my last video, but there we go. You use less product and need less maintenance when your hair is shorter, and I'm loving it so far. Oh, and I'm in a witchy mood, so I'm still wearing like the Halloween themes because pumpkins are still November-y. That's my excuse. Okay, let's get right to the books that I read in October. The first book that I finished in October was an arc that I got via NetGalley. It is called Mango, Mambo, and Murder by Raquel Reyes. This is a cozy mystery with a ton of Latinx themes. The author is Latinx, and I have to say, when I was younger, I was really into cozy mysteries. These days, they tend to be a little hit and miss for me, but this was a total hit. I am giving it 4 out of 5 stars. It's the first book in a series, so it has a little bit of, not a little bit, it has quite a bit of setup, right? Of describing where the characters are, who they are, who's in the small town, what the dynamics are. And so first books in a series can get bogged down by that, but I think this did a fabulous job. In Mango, Mambo, and Murder, you have a main character who is a professor who got her PhD but has moved to the Miami suburbs because her husband has family there. There's a promise of a good job and also just to be closer to family. So Medium, our main character, is having to figure out moving to the suburbs of Miami, which are very white, dealing with her in-laws, and reconnecting with family and with her culture as she's back. She goes to a ladies' luncheon where things are pretty snobby and she's a little weirded out. And then all of a sudden, one of the attendees is killed. And so she starts doing some investigating. The mystery part of the story is actually the weakest element, I felt, because she's actually spending a lot more time dealing with her in-laws and doing other things rather than investigating the murder. Food is a major part of the book because Medium is a food anthropologist, so she studies food and all of that, and is connecting with her roots. She cooks a lot of Caribbean food, and then there's other elements in the story in which food just keeps coming back into the story. Lots of mangoes. Mambo, there is Mambo in the book, and of course Murder. I love finding diverse cozy mysteries, and this one was a hit for me. Okay, next book that I finished in October was River Marked. This is book number 6 in the Mercy Thompson series by Patricia Briggs. This was fantastic. This has our main character with the main love interest working together without the larger cast of characters in a remote area, and it is fantastic. It also has our main character, Mercy Thompson, engaging with her history a lot more, especially her native side. Our main character is half native and half white, and her native elements have always felt like the weakest part of the story. Like it's what connects her to the supernatural in the story. But it has always also felt like the weakest element because she doesn't know she never got to meet her dad, and so she's not as connected to those roots. And in this book, there's a lot of delving into that for Mercy Thompson, and so I really enjoyed it. This was 4 out of 5 stars for me. The next book that I finished was The Fastest Way to Fall by Denise Williams. I just posted a dedicated review to this book. It just came out and it's fantastic. It's a romance that deals with a lot of social and cultural issues. It's an interracial romance, MF romance. The main character, Britta, is reviewing a fitness app, and West, our main character, is the owner of the app. She's reviewing major content warnings, though, for body image issues, disordered eating, discussions of fatness and fitness, and all of that stuff. So if those are triggers for you at all, stay away from this book. But otherwise, I loved it. If you want to hear more of my gushing, you can check out the video review I just posted. The next book that I finished was The Inheritance of Orquidia Divina by Zoraida Cordova. This is such a good book. For me, this was 4 out of 5 stars. It does magical realism so well. In fact, I would say that it updates magical realism in just the right ways. I just read 100 Years of Solitude, and so I've been reading some magical realism by the originators of the genre, and there are things from 100 Years of Solitude that really bothered me, and I felt like what Cordova does here is update the genre. Like, she takes what is really great about magical realism and gives it that modern twist, gives a modern audience what they want. It's just fantastic. In this story, Orquidia Divina, we start with our main character, Orquidia Divina, who has sent letters out to all of her family members telling them that you better come home because I'm going to be dead. They all rush to the family home, and sure enough, Orquidia Divina is dying, and she has what is her inheritance to hand off to them. It is not money, it is magical. And then her family members have to go on a journey to figure out Orquidia's past and how she came to be the person that they know. And so it's a lot of delving into that history. There's a circus, there's magic, there's evil, there's good. It is a fantastic story. I really loved it. And so this was part of my, Latinx Heritage Month reading. And I was just so glad that I was able to get to that book real quick. The next book that I read, I also picked up for Latinx Heritage Month and for Latinxathon, and that is Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Bazterrica. This is a book written by an Argentinian author. The premise is that there's this in our world, humans can no longer eat animal meat. There's something that has contaminated animals, all animals, and so humans cannot eat animal meat. Instead, they have chosen now to eat other humans. Cannibalism is a thing. And it is all turned into like a meat processing. The way we process animal meat is what ends up happening to humans. And we go into a lot of detail in this book about what that means, what a meat packing industry looks like when you're eating humans. Because our main character works in one of these meat packing plants, meat slaughtering plants. And the author investigates what this cannibalism means in different aspects of society, politically, culturally, all these things. I think my review of this book on Goodreads, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, but I might up that to 4.5. My review of this initially, my first reaction was, well, that was something wild. And that still holds true. This book is wild. I kept trying to look up spoilers because people keep talking about the ending, and yeah, I was shocked by that ending. It's not like a twist necessarily. It's a really gross book. It's really gross. If you don't want to read detailed descriptions of people eating meat and humans being slaughtered, you don't want to pick up this book. But if you want something really weird, really out there, very different from like anything else, you might want to pick up this book. It gets in your head. I think the author is clearly trying to say that we should all be vegan. I don't think the book will make you become vegan, but it's gonna make you think, and it's gonna mess with your head quite a bit. Yeah, that's what I've got. The next book that I finished in October was Witness to the Age of Revolution, The Odyssey upon Bautista, Tupac, Amaru by Charles F. Walker and Liz Clarke. So this is a nonfiction graphic series that investigates different historical moments. It's part of the graphic history series. Whenever someone, once in a while, someone will ask me for a nonfiction graphic novel recommendation, and this series is my go-to. I have used several of the books in class to teach with, and they're fantastic. They're aimed for the college classroom, and so the first part of the book is the graphic novel. The second part of the book is the historical context. So the authors put together a history of whatever event they are depicting in the graphic novel. And then part 3 is primary sources, like the actual sources that they're basing everything else on. And so it is fantastic for use in the classroom, but it is also, I think, great for just people that read history and want to investigate kind of these lesser known moments in history that had a big impact and can be used to analyze bigger themes. This one in particular is about an Argentinian revolt, an indigenous revolt that was not successful, but how that served as a building block for later revolutions. So this is fantastic. My students wrote pretty decent papers based on it. The next book I finished was also one I was using for class. My students aren't done reading it, so I will try to limit what I say here about this one, but this is The Wombs of Women, Race, Capital, Feminism by Françoise Verges, translated by Kayama Glover. So this book, anyone who's ever interested in what I did for my dissertation, the topics of my dissertation, usually, like, even friends will ask me for book recommendations, and I have never had one to recommend in English until now. Anybody who wants to learn a little bit more about the work I did in my dissertation, read this book. It's not exactly what I did, because what Verges does here is she investigates the feminist movement of the 1970s and highlights the hypocrisy of French feminism and leaving out the element of race from the movement. Because at the same time that abortion and contraception were illegal in France, they were legal and being promoted in the Tom-Doms, in the Territoire and Département d'Outre-mer, basically in the colonies. This was a topic that I came across. I came across this issue in my research, but I was focused, my sources were all focused in France, but the way Verges writes about La Réunion, like her point of compare and contrast is the island of La Réunion is just, it's amazing. I really, really enjoyed her critique of French feminism and her analysis of La Réunion here. It is excellent, excellent, excellent. This is more of an academic book though, so if you're not into reading heavy academic books, maybe not. Maybe I need to do a different video. I'm just talking about these topics. I teach research and write about the history of reproductive rights, and so that is right in my wheelhouse. The next book that I finished in October was The Dangers of Smoking in Bed. This is a collection of short stories by Mariana Enriquez. I picked this up, actually, like Tender is the Flesh. They were not in my TBR for Latinx Heritage Month, but they were holds that came in from the library right in time for Latinx-a-thon, and so I went ahead and read them. So this is a series of short stories that are kind of horror mystery short stories. They were okay. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars because I have nothing against the short stories. They just didn't wow me in the way that I had hoped. There were 2 stories that really stood out to me as being particularly good, but the rest I don't even remember. So pick it up if you want. I'm not gonna give it a huge positive rating. The next book that I read, it's actually in my office, because my students are still reading it, but it's A Different Mirror, A History of Multicultural America by Ronald Takaki. This is the textbook that my class on race and ethnicity in U.S. history is reading. And I found it to be a good book in the classroom, but an even better book for anybody that is interested in an introduction to the themes of race and racism in U.S. history. Like, he really does tackle U.S. history through like the traditional chronology and just give it to you all through the lens of race and ethnicity. It's fantastic. It's a great introduction to a lot of those topics. If you already know a lot on those topics, nothing in this book will be new for you. But for people who want an introduction to that, I think it is a fantastic book. Except for one thing, he uses The Tempest by Shakespeare a lot as like a reference point, and I'm not a huge Shakespeare reader, and so I kind of rolled my eyes every time he brought in The Tempest, and I moved on. And most of my students felt the same way of like, why does he keep bringing up The Tempest? The next book was also another one of these library holds that came in right in time for Latinx-a-thon, and that is Mean by Myriam Gurba. But Mean is a kind of autobiographical set of essays. They're connected, but there's also poetry in there, and it's just, I didn't rate this on Goodreads because it's hard for me. I guess it would be a 5 or 4 out of 5 stars, maybe 4.5, yes, because it's like she is really fearless in the way she talks about her lives and her life experiences, about sexual assault, about racism in education. Gurba used to be a high school teacher, and if you follow her on Twitter, she talks about education and racism within education a lot. But she's also just a really fantastic and creative writer. Like, I really enjoyed large chunks of this book, just a ton, as much as you can enjoy someone describing really difficult parts of their life. She just did it so well. I was fully immersed in her story, and I like even want to hear more. I want to read more of her writing because of this book. The next book that I finished in October was Children of Chicago by Cynthia Pelayo. Pelayo came up in a lot of recommendations for Latinx-a-thon, but I picked up the wrong book. This one is like Pelayo, I guess, does a lot of poetry and in a lot of like horror Mexican poetry, which sounds fantastic. I need to pick up Santa Muerte, which looks really good. But this one is a kind of detective crime story set in the city of Chicago, where children start dying by this body of water, and the main detective that is investigating it is the woman, and something similar happened to her sister. She lost her sister and then her mother when she was young, and well, her mother and her stepmother, and now these things are happening again, and it's all connected to a fairy tale. So if you're into fairy tales, you might like this more because the Brothers Grimm come up a lot. There's a lot of discussion of it. I gave this 2 out of 5 stars because the book just didn't work for me, and it has a lot of things that I should have liked. I like detective stories, Latinx main character, Latinx author, set in Chicago. I loved these kinds of mystery detective stories. I like elements of fantasy, but this one just didn't work for me. The next book that I finished was the book for my book club. My book club chose Meet Me in Another Life for the month of October by Catriona Silvey. And this was a flawed but really intriguing book. I love books with this premise. The premise is, what if you can live different lives over and over again and maybe even remember? So this is where we have 2 main characters, and they keep, in one life they are like people living in the city of Cologne, and they meet each other, and like that's it. They're 2 freshmen in the city. They have this great moment of connection, and then they never see each other again. In the next life, they are, what are they? Their father and daughter. In another life, they are lovers. In another life, they are professor and student. Like, they're just living through like different iterations. They are always themselves, and there are people in their lives that always recur. And then they figure out that they're living multiple lives. And then they're trying to figure out what's happening here. The premise is fantastic. The end was a little too rushed, but I loved the explanation that the author came up with for this world. I just really enjoyed it. Okay, I need to get through 2 more books. So the last 2 books that I read in October, the first was A Cupboard Full of Coats by Yvette Edwards. This was the October Read So Lit book hosted by Didi over at Mambo Reading. I loved this book. At the live show, I think people were giving it 4 out of 5 stars, but this is a 5 out of 5 star book for me. From the minute I started reading it, it grabbed me and didn't let me go. I read it in 2 days, and it just was fast-paced, full of intrigue and flawed people. So you're following Jinxie, who opens the door one day, and on the other side of the door is Lemon, who she has a history with. He comes in, starts cooking for her, and they start talking about their past. It turns out they both feel guilty for her mother's death. And then you start digging into little by little about what happened, as they're also living their life in the present. And the investigation of that is amazing. Huge content warnings for domestic abuse, for violence, for sexual assault, for teenage pregnancy. There's a lot of things that if you look for trigger warnings, you need to be aware of. But if you can handle that, I just found this to be a really powerful, really amazing read. The last book that I finished in October was my buddy read of Charles Dickinson's A Tale of Two Cities. I buddy read this with Courtney Ferreter. I will link all her information down below, and you should go check out her channel. We both thought this was such a boring book. I think she liked it a little bit better than I did. It's a classic that I always thought I should read because it's set in part during the French Revolution, right? And the two cities here are London and Paris, and set during the French Revolution. I felt like, okay, I should read this, and I've been wanting to read it. So when Courtney suggested we buddy read it, I was jumped at the opportunity. Yes, please. Like I said, I've loved buddy reading this with Courtney. She's a fantastic buddy reader. And if I hadn't been buddy reading this with her, I might not have finished it because it's so boring. The first third of this book, very little happens. Oftentimes you don't know whether you're in London or in Paris. The parts about the revolution were really cool and interesting. Dickens is clearly criticizing the revolution, and especially criticizing the terror. So his descriptions of the terror are very good, and the critique is good. Not everything's 100% accurate in that there are things that get left out that, like, when I teach the terror, I make sure are in there. But I'm nitpicking when I say that. Otherwise, the history is perfectly fine. So a 3. It's a 3 out of 5 star read for me because I wouldn't discourage anyone from reading it. Ultimately, I finished the book, and there were parts I enjoyed very much. And then there was a lot of ridiculousness and a lot of boringness. And like what Courtney was telling me was that this is typical of Dickens, of doing a lot of just like caricatures of people. Like the evil person in here is real evil, and the good person is like real good. But yeah, so that is it. Those are all the books that I read in October. So I read quite a bit. Hopefully you are still interested in what I'm reading and what I have to say about these books. If you have read any of these books, let me know. Even if you disagree with me, I always say I am happy to talk about our different understandings of books. As long as people are polite, I'm happy to engage in those conversations. And let me know if you agreed with me as well, because that just reinforces how great we all are. Just kidding. But thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.